Hi, yeah, I'm Annette from Voluntary Action Leeds, and I lead on the BME Hub. And I suppose really the stuff that's coming out is more about people's concerns about the lifting of the lockdown and how that impacts the children going to school. BME people are very worried about the high risk to BME communities and going back into the workplace and their children going back to school. So that's the main kind of worry at the moment. But generally people are kind of getting on with it. There's lots of other issues, but that seems to be popping out. And mental health obviously is still a big worry, and domestic violence. But I'm sure that those are threads that are running through others as well, but they are prevalent within BME communities at the moment, and a lot of I think there's going to be a lot of issues after this whole COVID is over and we kind of go back to some kind of normal. Then we'll see the aftermath, I think. So yeah,
really, important, those issues that thread through, Annette.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, Anna from Healthwatch, fresh from your fantastic delivery of your report at the Shielding Group this morning. That was so good.
Oh, thanks, Viv. Yeah, I know we're talking about shielding later, so I hope I'll be able to share a little bit about the Healthwatch survey then. But just really quickly, I'm here representing my colleague Harriet, who leads on young people for Healthwatch, and we're just this week we've launched a new survey as part of our weekly check-in, and that is focusing on the experiences of children and people aged 18 and under. So we're asking parents and carers to fill that in. We're interested in the emotional effects of shielding and lockdown, physical effects as well, because we've heard that paediatricians have been concerned that children aren't attending appointments and so on. And just as an aside as well, Healthwatch is just on the verge of releasing a report into the emotional well-being of people living in care homes. So keep a lookout for that. And that's it from us.
Thank you. Caris next for Deaf and Blind Society. Hi.
Hi everyone. I think for us the key focus at the moment is planning our return. We're going to be opening the centre next week, not to reopen, but we have some tenants upstairs in the centre who are going to be starting delivering services, predominantly sort of daycare orientated services to their sort of service user group. So we're going to be starting to sort of test out some of our measures and practices. So it'll be really interesting for the kind of later part of the conversation around the sort of track and trace and that sort of thing as well. So I think a lot of our work at the minute is around planning of that. We know that the community are desperately wanting to re-engage in some of the groups that they participated in previously, and so we're looking at ways in which we can do that and ways we can sort of reintroduce people together. And also just doing some planning and things like that for a workshop that I'm supporting with alongside Healthwatch and Forum Central in partnership with 100% Digital Leeds as well, which is in the next couple of weeks. So they've been the key kind of focus areas for us. I think in terms of other things, obviously there's been a lot of discussion recently around masks, public transport with expectation of wearing masks, the hospitals now, obviously anybody going in has to wear a mask. So there's been quite a bit of discussion around that. People who are lip reading, etc., for example, and interestingly, people sort of offering other views, i.e., people who do lip read but feeling like they shouldn't be exempt from wearing masks because actually that could potentially cause more of a spread. So there's been a few discussions around that as well. That's us.
Really important points about communication. Thank you, Caris. Should we go next, Damien, from men's health point of view and men generally?
Hello there, yeah. So I work for the Orion Partnership and for Feel Good Factor. I think a lot of stuff I've probably said before, I could just repeat the thing about from the men angle, men being much more likely to die from coronavirus, twice as likely and then 4 times as likely if you're an ethnic minority as well. And I've also mentioned that at the last recession, which there's every chance we'll be heading for one, that the male suicide rate shot up, quite possibly because men's self-worth tied in with employment. So there are always two things to bear in mind, I think, in general from that angle. It's just to take a sort of more specific angle, I suppose, just as a point of interest. The Ambassador Project works with businesses in LS8 and LS9 to support vulnerable and isolated men. And we've recently adapted that to produce a unlocked zine, which is going out via our Ambassadors and Food Delivery. And it's this edition was the potato edition, which has various has some very simple recipes and meal planner on the back of it. And now this idea came from the fact that one of our ambassadors at Chip Shop, business has never been better for them. You know, sales have shot through the roof with deliveries. I think it's just interesting in itself. And it's her that suggested we put the simple recipe in the magazine, because there was one family who came in and spent £50 on one meal for their family, you know, and she did all right out of it, obviously, but she was saying that shouldn't really be happening. So yeah, there's just an angle to have a think about.
Excellent, that's good. Charlotte, from Leeds Gate, would you like to come next?
Yeah. So a bit like everybody else, I think, as time's going on, I think a lot of us are faced with similar challenges and struggles from people that we work with. We've been doing a lot of work around securing some Wi-Fi for some of our members, doing some work with 100% Digital Leeds. We've managed to secure 10 Wi-Fi boxes, which is not very much, but it's a start, and we're open. If we implement them in the right way, that they will make a good difference. We've also been supporting people with, again, continued support with the food bank, the food vouchers, sorry. A lot of members are self-employed. So as the weeks have gone on, we've seen families struggling more and more, especially over the last few weeks. So we're continuing to support them with that. We're also continuing to support them with the welfare calls every week. Obviously tailoring each call, or every week the support is tailored to a person, because to what they may need, obviously identifying that some people are struggling more than others. We've also been working to try and implement the track and trace, trying to consider what challenges we might face, considering that it's an ethnic minority community, that it probably will face more challenges than the wider community. So we've been doing a lot of work around that, making sure that we've got things in place to support, and making sure that we're giving people the right information to support them properly.
The key issues affecting women we work with is really still financial vulnerability. We've seen an increase of women seeking support with kind of no other issues than financial needs, for example. So a lot of our casework is with multiple complexities, etc. But we're also seeing an increase in number of women who have no other need than the financial need. And that doesn't mean to say that financial need isn't crucially important, but it's a different type of need, and we're continuing to support that with food parcels and mainly money to top up utilities. And we're lucky that the weather has been so good, because if this had happened in winter, for example, utility bills demand would have been up, out of the sky, basically. Yeah. And also things like Wi-Fi, data. If it can't be Wi-Fi in the house, then at least data and phones, so they can engage with virtual groups. Although that hasn't been for everyone. We know that women are particularly struggling with mental health, either because they're shielding or because services aren't available and they aren't able, groups in person are still what a lot of people say are the best thing, and that's just not available, whether with us or anybody else. Yeah. And even if they have a tablet or a smartphone or data, virtually engaging is different, and some people find it really scary. And so we're trying where that's feasible and relevant, but where it's not, we also recognise that it's not for everyone. Emergency accommodation. it has been really good to have increased capacity on women-only emergency accommodation. As I said the last time, I think it's been amazing in one sense. However, we are now coming to a couple of issues where sometimes it's not appropriate for everyone, and the alternatives and how that's being offered isn't always great. And we flagged that with Safer Leeds and with housing commissioners, because it's sometimes the alternative options aren't safe or even realistic. There's not always enough dialogue with the women involved. Kind of decisions are being made for them. And move on, same discussion. So when there's move on property available, where that's not a realistic or safe option, still being offered as the only option. And that just means that in a few days they'll be homeless again, which is a wasted resource for everyone, really. So we're raising that as a key issue. Little bit possibly slide back from flexibility in prescribing in terms of scripts. The workers at 4Ds have been brilliant. I think this prescribing is where the capacity is a bit of an issue with them at the moment. So we're feeding that back to them, and they're trying to do what they can. And obviously it's not just an issue for us, but everybody working with 4Ds. And then the test and trace, like Charlotte just said, we've been working with Leeds Gate and MESMAC and Lassen as well in our Solidarity Network on how this will be really a key issue for some of the people we work with.
Just Anne's not here, so I'm here for Young Lives Leeds, really. Just to say that the mental health is the most prevalent in terms of anxiety about sort of the new normal, really, and coming back. And young people are worried about going to school and putting the infection onto their parents. So there's a lot of unknowns. I think it comes from not enough clear, consistent information about what's okay and what isn't okay. I think that's the underlying theme, really. Issues around children taken into care, the numbers are much lower than they would normally be. The average is about 40 to 50 a week, and it was down to 20 last month. In a month. So whether that's because the court system's not operating, social work, things might not be picked up, I guess. So there's safeguarding issue there. And I think, and some positives from organisations that are responding to the needs. So they're offering parents help and support with mental health because they're recognising that mental health is an issue. And I think that the knock-on effect of that is that staff are now working hours that either they're working flexibly with the parents. So once the children are in bed, they will then contact the parents, which works out much better for the parents, but has definitely issues raised for the organisations in terms of flexible working, that they're probably, staff are probably working far more rather than working different hours. And I think that's probably something that possibly needs considering with organisations moving forward.
Yes,
that,
I think
especially with online.
Yeah. Thank you.
And then of course the new normal stuff of people going, well, we want to have play. People are looking to the summer. We want to do play schemes. We want to be able to open up our building. Probably not going to be possible. And an awareness that more vulnerable children are probably not going to be able to have the places if they need people who are, social distancing measures can't be taken into account if they need toileting, for example. So they're more likely not to be able to come to groups because of that reason. I think that's me done. Thanks.
Yeah, helpful, and some really good resources from MindMate actually that have just been shared, which would be good. We can send that link round. Emily, would you like to come next from women's perspective? Just a couple of points, if that's. Thank you.
Quick sticks, yeah. So we've just had our survey, women's COVID survey finished, and we had just short of 1,000 responses, 971, which has given us a ridiculous amount of data. So I was saying, right, I'll get a report done in a week, and that's just not going to happen. Because what I want to do is make sure that I read every single response and give it justice by representing it in the report. So the key themes that are coming up for right now is mental health, juggling, childcare, working from home, cooking, cleaning, all the chores at the same time, and then that having an ongoing effect on mental health, it having an effect on their work, So all these sort of themes are intermingled. What they're currently worried about right now is lockdown being eased too soon and a second spike, and not trusting the government. And what they are worried about in the future, the general themes coming forward are gender inequality, that going back decades, and about that's kind of the main theme. And also health of the health came through as a massive concern, but interestingly not for themselves at all. It was for their own children or for elderly relatives or other people that they cared for. So key themes, but I will hopefully get that finished within the next week or so, and I'm really happy to share. There's a lot of really interesting data come out of that, so we're really pleased, and we'll share it as soon as we possibly can.
Thanks, Emily. That's really helpful. Jez, learning disabilities.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, Jez from Forum Central. I'll just keep it brief, but I suppose in terms of organisations, there was a couple of organisations feeling pressure from parents, with individuals with high complex needs, vulnerable, unable to social distance, to come back to day services. But then in terms of sort of positive stuff for day services and day opportunities, there's several working recovery groups that have been set up. So a main one for building-based services that's being led by Andy Rawnsley, but also just to pick up on Iona's point about children with additional needs, there's a working group led by Kath at Leeds Main Cap, and they seem to be very on it with their recovery planning and buildings and individual risk assessments, and so it might be worth sort of linking into that. And then on PPE, a thing that's been found is just people with learning disabilities within services being frightened of PPE. So some organisations working through sort of desensitizing or sensitising process to help people get used to it. But yeah, that's about it for now. Yeah.
Thank you. And anything from single parents, because that was your other.
So from Jane, when I spoke to her last week, it was sort of what I mentioned to you this morning, Pip, in the meeting, just about the vulnerability of very small voluntary groups and not having the infrastructure to apply for funding, not having boards of trustees, and as if there is sort of huge cuts, then whether those organisations are sort of decimated and the preventative work that they do, and how to sort of come together collaboratively on that to sort of help strengthen their position. So that was it.
Thank you. No, important. Thanks for that. Lucy.
Hi everyone, Lucy here from Forum Central. I will just give a quick update on carers, because I don't think anyone from Carers Leeds could make the call, if that's okay, Pip.
Val sent apologies, thank you.
Yes, so in terms of sort of carers, a lot of similar experiences to what people have already talked about, but particularly around decreased mental well-being in young adult carers is a really key theme that's coming through. Also, some of the really key challenges at the minute is around working carers who might be forced back into a caring situation as a result of COVID. And I think there was a report that came out a couple of weeks ago nationally for Carers Week that sort of highlighted that, but that's definitely a local issue and concern as well. Parent carers not having enough childcare provision and reduced care and community services, so particularly around respite as well, and people not feeling able to either ask or receive respite care at the minute, and whether it's available for them. So obviously putting a lot more pressure on, and then balancing the juggle with home and caring, resulting in less time for carers to themselves, and in situations less privacy, putting pressure on their own mental and physical health. Just to reflect some good things happening as well, though, Carers Leeds have been doing a great increase in terms of their wellbeing check-in calls, focusing on helping people to stay mentally well, and they're doing a lot around peer support using WhatsApp messaging groups, they've had a great success around that, which is really positive. Text messaging as well for people that use that, and also they've had a bit of a take up from working carers in terms of one-to-one clinics via Zoom. And that seems to be really expanding, so that's positive. and they had a key ask in terms of decision makers and sort of feeding up the issue strategically was around how do we provide assurance for carers going through the carers assessment process, as there will be many carers that would be eligible for a carers assessment that are just holding off at the minute. So how do we let people know what's available for them and how they can access it? I think that's it from me.
Thank you. Jen Bravo, hi.
Hi. No real issues in terms of our clients really. Social distancing was always an issue throughout this period. It'll become more so now that there is more changes in terms of social distancing, and so therefore that will impact on staff. We've got a lot of staff from BME backgrounds, which obviously increases their anxiety. So as an organisation, we are looking at what we are doing in terms of that, whether we go with the government reduced distance or we'll stay at 2 metres. Either way, that will impact us. Test and tracing, I know, is on the agenda. That will be an issue because potentially we could have a whole staff team out because of the nature of their shifts. And the other thing, obviously, is to prevent some assistance if we get outbreaks. But the other thing is where we fit as an organisation. We are spotted accommodation for people who are homeless. We're not care. We're not statutory, and so we're very low down the list in terms of accessing PPE, even though we need it. And it's very difficult in terms of specific guidance. We're having to interpret guidance to make it fit our services. So those are the kind of things that I think we need in terms of public health going forward to manage some of the situations and the different groups of people we have.
Thank you, Jen. No, that's a really important point about PPE, and yeah, there is some available free, but it's keeping that supply, isn't it, and having that regular confidence.
We're looking at kind of 3 key areas, so kind of housing, mental health benefits. Just wanted to say a really positive thing that's come out of these meetings with Paula Gardner, who I don't think is here this week, contacted me after, and we're looking at working more closely with Engage Leeds, which is really positive, and we're looking at working more closely with mental health services. So we're trying to preempt things. We're also doing kind of like looking at recovery plans, so it'd be interesting to see other people's kind of recovery plan toolkits, all that kind of thing, and what they're putting in there. I guess like 2 things that well, one thing that's come through, which I probably should just talk to you later, Jez, about this, is that people are getting quite a lot of bills through for the support they may or may not have received, and it's causing a lot of anxiety, and kind of people are quite upset about that. It probably affects the other autism services more than ours, but it seems to be quite a strong emerging theme that people are having to pay increased costs or kind of being given a double whammy and not having a benefit increase in line with that. I just wanted to say as well while we're here, if we're part of AdvoNet, a wider organisation. We're an advocacy organisation, so in that sense, I was looking at advocacy, and we were looking at our approach to Black Lives Matter and everything that's going on with that. So I'm not sure if anyone's got in touch with you and Annette. Can't see Annette anymore, but if anyone wanted to get in touch, let me know, and I'll pass it on to our CIO, who's keen to kind of work with various groups and see what we can do with that. Otherwise, yeah, I'd be interested to know what other people's experiences of peer support and their kind of capacity to deal with that, and how they're looking at that capacity, because my feeling is that kind of independent mutual support groups where we just give a little bit of help setting up might be the model, because otherwise we're probably going to get inundated with too many people accessing peer support. But that's me, yeah.
And that's a huge need and a growing need, yeah, to reflect Amber's point as well, doesn't it, about groups and people needing support. Sam, I'm so sorry, from Migrant Access Project. Hi, Sam.
Hi. Hi everyone, I'm Sam Powell. I work for Leeds City Council's migration team. Just a point that I want to briefly touch on, Pip, which would be useful to have further discussions on, is the work that we're doing around helping get key COVID-19 messages out to diverse communities. Initially, there was the set of public health videos that went into YouTube, but we're thinking much wider than that. And the messages have been continually changing. So over the last week, we've been trying to agree messages with greater longevity, which have now been agreed. But I won't delay from handing over to Tim and colleagues, because I know he's bringing that health message, but it'd be good to work with colleagues around the community of interest on this work a little bit more going into the future.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. That's a really key point, isn't it, about that longevity and the message now going forward. No, thank you for that. Brilliant. So Tim, welcome.
Thank you, Pip, and thank you to everybody on the call. I've met some of you before, but some I haven't met, and I think I'm just taken back by all the great work and links that you have. So thank you for all of your work. I suppose what I wanted to do today, I mean, I sent through some background information, so hopefully you've had a chance to look at that, but I just wanted to pick out a few highlights of the COVID-19 outbreak plan, and then talk through some of the challenges that we have, and hopefully we can work together on some of those challenges and develop some approaches together. So I'm just going to go through some of the highlights, but then hopefully we can have a discussion about kind of some of the next steps. I mean, I think the first thing to say is that, you know, we have quite well developed outbreak plans. So certainly my team and others have been involved in measles outbreaks, hepatitis A, you know, we've got environmental health colleagues, sexual health colleagues that have done lots of things in the past. But I think with COVID-19, it feels quite different. It's all part of recovery and confidence in terms of coming back to some kind of normality. And there's been a load of new changes today, which kind of moves us one step further. But I also know that there are kind of some key concerns, and you may well also have seen that there's been some outbreaks in some primary schools in Leeds and certain businesses as well. So, and I know particularly in some communities there's some real fears about kind of resuming kind of something approaching normality. So we have to kind of have an enhanced local outbreak control plan by the end of June. And I think, I mean, the main difference is that we need much greater capacity because there's a likelihood of multiple outbreaks, and that could be in care homes, it could be in schools, it could be in faith settings, it could be in localities. So we don't really know how it's going to work out, is the honest answer. And it could be very significant, or it might just go away. And I think we need a system that can be agile depending on what kind of happens in the future. I think engagement and working with groups that are underserved is absolutely crucial to this. So I think a lot of the guidance has come down from national and a local authority level. We've watched the briefings and then we've had to implement it, and there's been no kind of prior kind of warning around that as a system. So I think, you know, there is something about how those messages are communicated to communities of interest, and you know, the trust and the links that you have which we don't have, and actually how we work together on some of that stuff. Comms is absolutely crucial, and Sam has talked about some of the work that we've already done in terms of translating messages into community languages, about infographics, about videos. But we need to do more of that, and we need to do things that are innovative and creative and have resonance with different groups. And I think the other things around health inequalities. So there's been loads around this. I mean, I think, you know, you know a lot of the stuff around risk groups. So kind of the biggest risk factor is age and older people. But also deprivation, how deprived areas are twice as likely to suffer the consequences as non-deprived, Black and ethnic minority communities, men, people in low paid occupations, people with underlying health conditions. But it's far more complicated than that. And I think, you know, as we move into recovery and probably into recession, there's going to be all of the unseen consequences and kind of smaller groups that are not represented there, but that you represent, and some of the things that you've just been talking about. So I'm going to stop there, but I think the two things that I'm really interested in getting your views on and working up are kind of the one which is about proactive preventative engagement. So rather than reacting to outbreaks, the best thing to do is to stop them in the first place. So kind of with the communities of interest, how do we do that? And then the second bit is about reactive contact tracing. So, if we know that there is an outbreak, how do we work with you in terms of speaking to people in those settings, in terms of kind of improving that contact tracing? So, I mean, I'm going to stop there, because I think the most important thing is around the discussion. We have got some funding locally to enhance our local system, and I've been advocating for the third sector around that, and hopefully we should be able to announce that in the next coming weeks. So I think, you know, we have to work out how we do that. I can't give any promises, but my view always has been that this stuff can't come for free, and that actually the third sector is a crucial part in this. We need to build on the assets and the links that you have, but we also need to protect you in terms of, you know, the funding crises that we all have, including the local authority, in terms of our funding. But, you know, rather than me saying I'd like it to be this way, I think we need to develop it together, and you know, want to listen to kind of, you know, the issues and the stories that you have. But I think, you know, just to reiterate, it's really about that kind of proactive, preventative engagement. And then if we do have outbreaks, how do we work with you to do that effective contact tracing? So I'll stop there. I'll hand back over to you, Pip.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. And I think, just on behalf of all of us, I think we just really appreciate that really positive, proactive, trying to be person-centred and community-centred about this approach, Tim. So thank you for kind of sharing that with us and welcoming our input. Does anybody have any immediate thoughts? It's obviously something that we can also take away and think about and share with people who aren't here, and, you know, take conversations back to other organisations that you're connecting with. But yeah, Damien, do go.
Yeah, I think for our next edition of Unlocked, we're actually going to do a test and trace edition, and it's going to be hosted by Tess and Trace, two cartoon characters. But we're going to try and, I think, looking at this document, you know, this diagram, it's about getting that into simpler language, even if you do speak it, even if English is your first language.
Yeah.
And I think it's about trying to get those messages across. And, you know, for example, and there's going to be questions that come out like, well, what is the test? What does it involve? And also the why is not totally clear, I think, as well. And I think it is a community approach, isn't it? The reason we're doing this is so that we can protect everyone and help Leeds, the society, everything come through this. And I think if people know the why and actually believe in that and engage in it, I think they're much more likely to want to try and decipher those diagrams. But also, let's not have the diagrams. Well, yes, let's have the diagrams. Let's try and find a way to put that across in simpler, more attractive graphics, language, whatever.
And that might be a real practical example, Damien, of where, you know, perhaps some funding that enables you to help make that possible, or, you know, if there's something that then can be kind of shared more widely, because I think that's often where, you know, the perspective that you all bring to help kind of translate that. But also I think there's something, you know, we're not saying, we have a balance here, don't we, between all the kind of the official things and the important messages that have to be kind of signed off. And we've got a little bit of license, haven't we, to kind of flex with that and bring something a bit different to it, you know. And obviously, you know, we want to do that in a way that's helpful and, you know, run that past, you know, people like Tim where possible, but equally recognise that that's exactly part of the role, isn't it, that we can help kind of bring that kind of greater understanding of how it will be received and what it feels like to kind of be on the receiving end of that kind of information.
Yeah, because it is quite, I mean, I have to stop and pause when I look at the diagram. It's just how it is, you know. I'm not sure they could do the diagram any, but I'm not saying they could do it any better. I'm just saying you do have to stop and have a think about it.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree. I just typed out that I think, you know, we have a number of evidence-based messages in the city, but, you know, really it's about that trust and creativity and innovation that you can bring to it, you know. So, you know, I think it's there have been so many different messages, but I think the stuff around, you know, hand washing and social distancing, but also about the practicalities of getting the test. And I think this week, the phone line number is out there for the home testing. So kind of, you know, just things like that are really important to promote. But then, you know, for me, part of it is about how people are supported when they're isolating and making sure that the welfare offer is right for the city. I mean, it's the proactive stuff that we've really got to focus on, I think.
We'd also, like I said before, I think that one of the key issues for some of the communities is also just the stigma in general, and then the enhanced stigma for certain groups that might make it even more difficult to talk about tests and tracing and how we deal with that, how we get that message across. And you know, on the one hand, how it may conflict with our independent and trusted role. In the same sense, we need, you know, it's important that people share that information, but understand that and how, you know, we've talked about first we've suggested maybe being involved in talking to test and trace staff about that question, that simple question about who you've been in contact with may not be simple at all for some of the communities we work with, and the stigma associated with it may be huge. So it's just not as, there is a really important role for communication and for third sector organisations, but there's also an understanding that if you are contacted by test and trace, what, you know, really clear what happens to the information, but also how to respond to an answer that you might not expect to get, and how we do that. And maybe there's a role for communities to be involved in that rather than organisations, for example.
Yes, no, and a couple of people, Emily, agreeing, and a couple of other people agreeing with that. And I think that's a really important point, Amber, isn't it? That our role isn't to in any way, you know, kind of coerce or, you know, we don't want to be getting people to do things, but we absolutely want people to have good information so they can make decisions, you know, and Damien's point about this being about how do we protect each other and our communities and the people that we care about.
Absolutely.
Certainly, one of the early things we did was we had some information, well, some questions really back from PAFRAS when the Walk 2 Centre first opened, you know, and they're really obvious questions that, you know, we just didn't quite have the answers for. So being able to say, actually, these are the kind of frequently asked questions that people are going to think about, what happens to this information and how's that fed. So I think being that two-way kind of channel and test of, you know, the kind of sense check really for information, I think is a really important part of what we do. And
yeah,
Jeanette,
I think that's really important. Nick isn't here, but she emailed me to talk about her concerns around victims of domestic violence and concerns around the app, and you know, kind of partners being able to track ex-partners down. And you know, I think we fed those back through to Tom Reardon in his national role around that. But we've also kind of made Public Health England aware, because I think it was in the information, but there are 3 different levels of tier 1, tier 2 and tier 3 in terms of the kind of the different levels. So there's like a national one, which is a call centre line. There's the Public Health England one, which is kind of trained specialists, and then there's the kind of local authority level that we link in for kind of complex settings and groups. And I think, you know, a lot of the confidentiality stuff, we're assured that, you know, it is confidential, and that's absolutely part of how they set things up. But if you're hearing that, we almost need to take that message back and then get a response back to you, so that you can then relay that to the people that you work with. Because I think if people are not happy to use it, then, you know, we're missing people out of the system. So I think it's all about trust, isn't it, really? And you know, I mean, the app stuff, I think I can understand why people would be uncertain about it, and maybe that's why some of the changes happen. But yeah, I don't know.
Well, and that issue about trust, I know Owen, I think, has left, but he raised for people, oh, hi, Owen, sorry, you know, you raised that issue, didn't you, around for people who just might not trust that, and also Annette, we've had conversations around that as well, haven't we? So I don't know if either of you want to kind of expand on what we can do practically to be proactive around that element.
I mean, I guess myth busting is always a good thing to come out of it, kind of common myths around things. I mean, I'll confess I'm confused about when this is actually going to be happening and what's happening with it and all that kind of thing. But it definitely kind of there'll surely be some common myths that come up around it. I guess in a way, like, that's always difficult, because where there's conspiracy theories, quite often conspiracies do exist. I know that how that makes me sound, but like you can't dispel everything. So like having honest and upfront information about where data is stored, about where that, so people can make that informed choice, like you say, Pip. So saying this is wrong, but this is the correct information would be useful.
And perhaps it's also a case of, if some of those are going to be too difficult to overcome, what do we then do? What are the conversations or the mechanisms or the relationships that, if that is the case, need to be fostered? Because it's much better to know that and to deal with it, isn't it, than to brush it under the carpet and to not acknowledge it.
I think so. I was having a conversation with some of our hub reps about that same thing today, and about the fact that there's a lot of mistrust around the system, and this the idea that they're targeting BME people because of all the stuff that's going on, and as was said, the conspiracy theories don't help. So we were talking about if people don't follow it, what can we do to help make sure that people get the right messages and that we put a positive message across. And we were looking at how we can do that and sort of help facilitate those messages getting out and making sure that then they're not scaring people even more, really.
Yeah, no, that's good. And Anna, I know you've been nodding and put something on the message board about some of that information that you've had through Healthwatch.
Yeah, so just some indications that we've had that employers have been pretty unclear about what they can and can't expect of their employees, especially employees who are shielding. And I'm sure that's only going to become, more confusing as time goes on. And we were just reflecting at Healthwatch recently that there are certain populations in Leeds, so for example, the very large Eastern European population, who tend to be, of working age, that we simply don't hear from very much. And it's just about thinking of ways of getting messages to them. People who might often be working in jobs where you've got many, many people in a single space, and who are therefore, particularly vulnerable to the virus.
And Sam, that's probably quite a big area for you for the kind of migrant connection work, isn't it?
Yeah, the hostile environment is what the immigration policies have been called or referenced as. Apparently now we're in a compliant environment, but I don't know if the memo has reached through. So I think the connection to health has been problematic. Migrants, running through from very new migrants, European migrants, also the Windrush generation, who the only way I can really describe it is that the Home Office agents of the state was expanded into different arenas where people used to feel safe accessing those types of services. So I think it's unfortunate the test and trace, because that language might mean something quite different to some of our newer communities, or those who feel the impact of a hostile environment as it's referred to.
Yes, no, I think that's really important. And we have flagged some of those issues about language, I think, haven't we, Tim? But thinking what we can actually practically do about that might be good.
Yeah.
So I think, unless anybody's got anything in particular about that first, I think there's a willingness to kind of work on that whole kind of proactive prevention. And, I think, we've got some links and we've got opportunities to develop those more. Is it worth coming on to that second point, Tim, about what if we do get an outbreak? Hopefully all of this is about trying to prevent it and keeping people safe and well, but how we might work if that does happen, and what the particular challenges and concerns might be from the perspectives that you all bring to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So there is something in Public Health England called a standard operating procedure. So this is for different settings and groups. So, for example, there's one for care homes. We've done lots of really good work in Leeds actually about minimising the impact of COVID in care homes in Leeds. But there's also one for, well, the language keeps changing, and I don't like any of the language. So if you've got any suggestions of better language, but it is about vulnerable groups. And I know in Bradford they've talked about inclusion, and we're starting to talk about people at the risk of the impact of COVID, which is a bit lengthy, but you know, it kind of sums up what it's about. But typically when that happens, Public Health England will do contact tracing, so they'll find who that person's been in contact with, they'll give them advice on shielding and support that they need, and then they'll follow up kind of other people that they've been in close contact with. There's different guidelines around schools, so in the media today you'll see about Hovingham School and how they've decided to close that for 7 days, and you know, today we've been doing lots of work proactively with the community, and I know, Sam, you've been included in some of that stuff, haven't you, with some of the work you're already doing. But so usually it's a bit of a process where Public Health England get in touch with people like me, and then we get in touch with lots of other people and we kind of do something proactively. But I suppose what I'd like to develop is something where we've got a proactive list for the communities of interest, and I think some are more well developed than others, some are more complicated than others. So I'm thinking particularly about BAME, which is really complicated, and some bits will be well represented and other bits will not be so well represented. And I suppose for me it's building up a kind of better picture. It's not a criticism, I think it's just understanding where our reach is, about how, if there is an outbreak, we can communicate with different people and we have a bit of a flow. Because if it happened tomorrow, you know, we'd probably just pick up the phone for our kind of friends and people we work with and just try and get that message out there. But I think it's developing a more robust system as this develops, really. So we've got a skeleton system, and you know, Pip and other people are really keenly linked into this, but I think it's just developing that so that, you know, if outbreaks happen, which they will, you know, we've got a bit of a stronger infrastructure about that. Does that make sense, Pip?
Absolutely, yeah. I think, yes, because I think, you know, when you first mentioned that, my sense is, well, you just pick up the phone, but actually that's pretty random, isn't it? And you need to have a really kind of clear sense of that. I think actually this links across, obviously communities of interest are really important in this, and it's great that you've brought this here, but it will also link across to the geography and the kind of hubs that are operating out in the wards, and you know, obviously making those connections too. Damien, do you want to come in?
I don't know, is it too obvious to say that we could use our sort of client management systems we have to get messages out? If there was an outbreak, for example, somewhere in East Leeds, Orion uses this thing called Civi, and we've got, you know, hundreds of contacts on there we could just send a message out to. I mean, presumably that's something that would be on the table anyway, isn't it, I suppose, but just thought I'd mention it anyway.
No, I
we
think
could
that's
do that,
a really
you know.
Good suggestion, because I think what we haven't had is anything that networks and maps what those connections are. You know, again, there will be some assumptions about large organisations and how different people might relate, but I don't think we've got a kind of strong sense of that. So that might be something that some thought could go into, to just do some scoping of what that could be and how it could work. Sam?
I was just thinking as we were unpicking it that it's not just who we communicate with, it's how we communicate, because that would cause concern, or you know, communities will react in different ways. So I think that we need to factor that in so that the messages are handled in a sensitive, appropriate way.
Absolutely. And yeah, I think comms and clear information, and that's been such a kind of key theme, hasn't it, throughout all of this?
Even to the point of, I mean, that links back to the point Nick made, I think, as well, but also, you know, who has control over communications of a person, who controls their phone, that kind of stuff. And what the consequences of that kind of a message might be to them.
Risk for domestic abuse, and understanding the mechanisms of that. And I think it also comes back to, you know, the point that you were making, Amber, about stigma and kind of what all this kind of feels like for people, and yeah, I mean, we know, I think, Anna, from the work that Healthwatch have done and from national studies, that even, you know, people might be told that they ought to be shielding, but actually if you're in a really low paid job that you risk losing, or, you know, there are all sorts of reasons why those messages themselves might be very difficult for people. So trying to understand that and have routes to support and help people have conversations, which is harder than usual, because normally they would be in settings where people are meeting, and you know, you can have a conversation around a table, can't you, when you can see people, and you know, it becomes all a bit more difficult, doesn't it, when we're trying to do that on Zoom or by text, or it's a kind of different mechanism. And different again, Caris, for people who have communication issues and don't have, you know, might have other mechanisms, and obviously the issues around translating, and huge issues really, aren't there, about how we do this. So perhaps some further exploration of not just what the mechanism, but just some key appropriate messages, and what that will be, that are perhaps agreed in advance, so that it's not just when it happens that we start thinking, but perhaps plan in advance, you know, how would we communicate this to, you know, homeless people, perhaps, Jen, who are, you know, living in accommodation, or to, you know, the various different kind of groups and connections. So that might be a useful thing to explore, Tim, around some sort of pre-planning around some of that messaging.
Yeah, and we've already made a start with that through the work that Sam and Chetna are doing around those key messages. So I think, you know, we've got the thinking around it, but it's that innovation and creativity and trust. Those are the kind of three aspects to it that you know, you have with the people you work with. So, you know, I think we can do more on that, and we'll have to keep we'll have to keep looking at it, because the messages do keep changing, don't they? But I think also it's a two-way process, you know, so it's kind of, why aren't people going for a test? Is it about finance and money and needing to work? And then, you know, how do we feed that back? Because I've got a concern. So like the shielded cohort, there's a large number of people there that are working age adults that live in inner city areas, that need the money, they don't have any reserves, you know, so if they're not working for a week or two, then they're in dire straits, and that's the impact on them, their families, the people in their community. So at the moment there isn't a clear answer as to where they get support. I mean, obviously there's support from the council in terms of things like food and medicine, but not in terms of income. So that's one of the things that we flagged nationally, that, you know, we don't know how to answer that. But, you know,
again,
we've
locally
got to be honest about it.
Be able to help with that if we have those links in, and we can start thinking, have we got a mechanism to release resources or put people in touch? You know, one of the really helpful things that, you know, Daisy's been regularly circulating is that Routes to Support document that Rachel Loftus has kind of produced, and there's also the a separate link to all of the different food offers. So there's something, isn't there, perhaps about having that local connection and local knowledge. But again, we need to try and do that in a way that is fair and meets everybody, and that we know we've got kind of good coverage of that. So again, it will be about working with other partners, won't it, as well as
yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have a good offer, but it won't be good enough for everybody, and I suppose that's the bit that is a concern, isn't it? And people might not choose to test or isolate because they feel that they can't, and that's a risk to the broader population, isn't it? So yeah, absolutely.
Is there something about peer sorry, Sam, I know you want to come in, but we talked about peer support earlier, didn't we, in terms of supporting each other? Is there something about peer kind of information and how we use people? I know Charlotte had done some really good work from Leeds Gate earlier around videoing and getting messages from people from the traveller community in a way that will be heard. Is there also something about using people's voices to communicate messages?
It's a good idea.
So that again might be something, if people have got some thoughts about that, you know, again, if, you know, there's some need for resource, or I think partly what we want to be able to do is not let you know, things feeling difficult or not knowing how to do them be a barrier if they feel like a good idea. So how can we kind of capture and enable some good ideas to happen and make sure that people have got that support, whether that's practical or financial, or having the right person in, you know, a comms or whoever to kind of help with that. So that might be something to explore as well. Yeah, cool. Any other thoughts? Sorry, Sam. Yes, you were coming in.
I was just going to add to our initial thoughts. Pip, it might be useful if Chetna and I, which we were talking about this morning, come to a future meeting and talk about what we've done so far and we have 5 key messages with greater longevity, and then we can progress that conversation around some of those ways of engaging and communicating it. I think from the discussions I've had with Tim and other colleagues is we do want the community's voice in the messages. We want communities to take ownership and be creative. So we've got some beginning ideas, like different ways that local radio stations could hopefully interpret those messages by local voices that are known. So be keen for colleagues to just have a think about that, and then perhaps for the next meeting,
excellent,
Chetna and I can come and give you an update and listen to what your thoughts and feedback are.
That would be great, Sam. Thank you. And I know Chetna and people were working to get somebody filming the Walk To Test Centre, weren't they, for example, which, you know, so that somebody could kind of walk through what it's like to kind of go to it in a way that kind of brings that to life a bit. So that kind of example of thinking through. Yeah, thank you. So I don't know if anybody's got any other particular points that they want to come in. I think we've got some good kind of actions there around kind of using the mechanism that we've got to, and the point about really having good, consistent comms, but also having it in that sort of more creative and accessible way that is a real way in which, as a group, we can help public health colleagues. I think we've talked about some of the specific mechanisms if there is an outbreak, both in terms of the practicalities of getting in touch with people, but also agreeing some of those messages and trying to make sure that we know what we'd be saying in advance so that we've got that. I think there's a bit of stuff around practical support and how we help empower all of your organisations and the people that you work with to start voicing and kind of sharing some of these messages in that different way that will make them much more likely to be heard. And I think Damien's example of some of the work with the locked in, you know, some of that hard copy information, I think has been really good example. And then a suggestion that Sam and Chetna come and talk specifically at the next meeting about some of the work that they've been doing and look at how we build on that. So is that useful, Tim? Does that cover the areas that you were hoping?
Yeah, that's been really useful. Thank you so much for having me. It's virtually. I think there's some really good ideas to build on, but I think for me, really, it's about kind of the next steps about the kind of proactive, positive, preventative messages, but then also building up that network if we have outbreaks and making sure that our reach is kind of further than just the formal routes that we have. So, I mean, you know, this is moving really fast, and I think, you know, it might be that I can come back, you know, with some next steps.
If I just take 2 minutes just to give you some quick overview of some of the practical things that have happened, because I think it's really important that we see the kind of impact as well of some of the work that we've done. So I just wanted to run through a couple of those, and then we'll come to you, Rachel, because I know you wanted to give us some update around the new shielding information and advice. So to start with, the Walk To Test Centre, which thank you all. I know people have worked hard to try and get information out and to share that. There's some really good news in that more people are using that. So not because we care about getting the numbers up for the sake of it, but the fact that it's one of the range of options, and it had particularly come about partly, or our connection with it, because we'd raised how inaccessible the drive to centre was. So really good to see that that's gone up from literally a handful of people every day to 80 or so people booked, certainly on one of the highest days. So that's a community test centre just in very close to the middle of town that people can walk to, and hopefully that's kind of accessible and available and one of the options for people. some of the issues around digital, and we've raised repeatedly just concerns about digital access and the wider necessity of all of the different changes of how things are being delivered because of COVID. And we've been asked to do a paper for the CCG to just highlight some of what that need might be. So please do send any particular issues for that, but really good that having raised that, colleagues from the CCG have said, okay, put that down, let us know exactly what that means, because recognising that the third sector is an important part of that health and wellbeing system that's responding to COVID. It's not just about big NHS organisations. We raised issues about what it feels like and the fear of returning back to services, which has been a big theme, and that's been raised in the Reset and Resilience and a number of other meetings. So kind of helping make sure that people feel and see and kind of understand that it isn't just a case of you just open the doors again and everyone's just going to be back as they were. Shielding we're going to come on to, and just finally I just wanted to mention that there is a tackling inequalities working group that's been set up, partly because there's been some really big conversations at Health and Wellbeing Board and at PEG, and again raising all of the issues and concerns that you've brought, and we've been able to kind of flag that, has really is seeing people kind of making sure that practical steps are happening and that people from a whole range of different organisations are connecting into that. So yeah, I just wanted to flag those practical things that are happening, because I think one of the really powerful things that we have is a city that really cares about people and about working together and has a strong partnership. So being able to build on that and develop that and make sure that we're using that to kind of meet needs of people who are most, you know, there's so much risk, isn't there, for particularly a lot of the communities that we're concerned with. So anything that we can do that will help make things go well for individual people and families and communities is really important. So yeah, that was just a bit of a quick update overview. So shall I hand to you, Rachel, to talk a bit about shielding and give us the latest? Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. So so many of you will have seen the announcement yesterday, but some of you won't have done, that the overall advisory for shielding was due to come to an end at the end of June, but that's actually been extended to the end of July. And I think it's really important to reiterate that, because a lot of the noise yesterday was about the positive side of things. But actually, I think already I've seen today a lot of people saying, oh, so shielding's over then. So I think that advice is that at the moment, prevalence is low. And if it continues to be low, by the end of July, we'll be able to put a pause on the full shielding advisory. From the 6th of July, what they think is that it will be safe for people to spend more time outdoors, but still to minimise any contact with gates or any objects other people may have touched. To continue to limit contact with people from outside your household, but that you can start to enjoy a period of time outdoors with people not from your household, up to 6 people. So a bit like the regulations that are currently in place for people, and importantly also for people who are shielding who live alone, that they'll be able to form a support bubble with another, like a mutually exclusive support bubble with another household, as long as one of those households is a single person household or a lone parent or a lone person with the person that they care for. And I've just had that verified, because that's quite important, because a lot of the government mentioned about lone parents, but actually it's about lone people with a dependent. So that might be important for some people that you work with. So I think that's really important. But then therefore it's important to say that between now and the end of July, that means still nobody should be coming into your home if you're shielding. You should still not be going inside any other place that's not your home unless it's for medical reasons. You should still not be going shopping, and you should still be getting deliveries to your door, not coming inside. Hand washing, catch it, kill it, bin it, in terms of any respiratory hygiene is the term that's used, but as we all agreed this morning, that's not particularly helpful. So that means any sneezes into the elbow, any tissues straight into the bin, re-sanitize your hands after touching any of your own respiratory fluids. So those are things that are really important to kind of to continue on with. I think the announcement that it will be paused from the 1st of August should prevalence remain low throughout July is also a kind of another bit of the story that seems to have got missed yesterday, which is if we continue on that downward trend. So I think they said at the moment prevalence is that 1 in 1,700 people would have the virus, and therefore that means that you can relax the restrictions. So if that continues to be the place, to improve at that pace, then by the 1st of August it should be safe for people to return to COVID safe work environments. And again, so I've just been asking, what does COVID safe actually mean? And so they're saying that basically any employee should have a preference for somebody who's clinically extremely vulnerable to be in the most safe environment in work that it's possible for them to be in. So that means that if you've got staff members who want to return to work and there's a choice between frontline and back office, they should have a preference and priority to take those back office roles. It was 2 meters until about midday. I've asked for them to reiterate whether 2 meters remains in place for people who are clinically extremely vulnerable, or whether that 1 meter plus is the factor for everyone else. I think there is still a little bit of an issue around those people who won't be able to safely return to work on the 1st of August and who will remain only eligible for statutory sick pay. We know that that's possibly going to be an issue for those people who've been receiving government food parcels until now, because actually that could be quite a significant shift for them if they've previously been in work, possibly self-employed or kind of gainfully but temporarily employed, for their income to have kind of taken such a hit over a sustained period and then for not to be accessing food. So I think that's something already I'm thinking that we need to start talking to those people who are receiving those parcels currently, of which there's about 5,000 something people who kind of asked for help with that. But within those, we don't know how many of those it was a practicality issue, and for how many of those it was a finance issue to receive those parcels. So that's quite a big priority. But I think just having had kind of half a minute to breathe since yesterday, I suppose what I'd really like to do is reset the conversation, as we always said we wanted to do, which is what do people who are clinically extremely vulnerable need from us in Leeds to stay happy, healthy, and previously at home, but now as safe as can be in whatever environment they will be come the 1st of August. So what we're planning is we're doing some immediate comms in terms of the text messages that are going out to people who are shielding in Leeds, and an email out to people we've got email addresses for. We'll send a follow-up letter next week just as a reminder that local help is available and that we'd like to start the conversation. But somewhere, hopefully around the middle of July, what I'd like to be able to do is go out to everybody who's shielding with a letter in the first instance, and with follow-up calls where we think it's something that's worth doing, with just like a really warm conversational letter with information that's really specific to what help will be ongoing, what organisations are doing great work in that locality. I think particularly for communities of interest, I think that's something I'd really like to do. I'm looking at you guys. I'm also imagining maybe like a series of videos where you just talk about the particular things that you can do, and that we can get those out and kind of start that being something that's saying this is Leeds and this is always Leeds before shielding and after shielding, and that help is available. And I think that feels like that's the right tone to take, because I think maybe about 4 months ago I would have been going, oh, help, it's a bit doing too, but I think the anxiety and the stress that we're hearing from people, so it's like help is available to work with you, to do the things that support you. So that's the kind of little ideas I'd like you to go away and kind of start forming as soon as you possibly can, really, for us to start kind of creating those products that will do that. So I think wherever possible, the letters, I'd like them to go very as locally targeted as we can. So I'm thinking probably kind of LCP-ish style patch at this point, so that we can do that very kind of these local
partnerships. Does that, yeah?
Yes, yeah. If that feels about right. I don't think Ward feels kind of still too big and not real. LCPs aren't really real either, but we do, because we've got that kind of support offer around the local care partnerships. It feels like we've got a much more coherent set of organisations, but specifically I want to make sure that everything around communities' interests that work across the city is included in all the letters. Again, I wish that I had the ability to say I could target it to the communities of interest and just send them a letter in that respect. So yeah, so I think that would be really important. I think the other thing to note is that the letters that will be being sent out from government, there will be translated versions available on the website, but they won't necessarily be going directly to people who need that language, because we know we are going to be relying on fairly flawed information. So if I send the link out as soon as those letters are uploaded via PIP, that those are things that if there are people that you work with, that might be something that you want to supplement, say, the letter that's coming today. Because as we did say, and I'm conscious this has been recorded, the fact that it says in English at the very top of the letter that letters are available in all the languages possibly isn't as helpful as the person who wrote that sentence thought it was.
It didn't even say they were available, it said they will be available shortly.
Yes, yeah. So I think even that kind of standard thing that we would normally have put in every language on the back of a letter saying if you want to see another copy of this letter, go here, even that's not available. So we'll make sure we circulate that. So yeah, and other than that, I'm kind of really open to ideas about what you think would be the right ways to provide reassurance messaging. I think I've mentioned before about registration being quite important. So there's a brilliant new poster that we've got. Registrations will close on the 17th of July, and I think it's really important to get people to register before that date, because that's what makes you able to get priority delivery at the supermarkets. And I think, again, it's that thing of if people are managing their own risk beyond the 1st of August, those people who maybe previously were okay asking others to do things for them, actually they might prefer just to have that as an option. So I think that's something that we'd particularly like to get that out. So I think I only asked for that 17th of July change to be put onto it about midnight last night.
Yes,
so
that's the people at Voluntary Action Leeds, I think Iona's kind of on with sorting that out. And as ever, all of this information, we will send it out to you, aware that, we're bombarding you with a lot. So any feedback about how we can make that easier or more directed, but, hopefully the fact that, Daisy kind of pulls that together into a weekly email and flags stuff, occasionally if there's something that feels really urgent to send in addition, but to try and minimise the number of things and to kind of make it as clear and accessible as possible. But thank you, Rachel. No, that's incredibly helpful. And, again, it's brilliant that we've got you that's kind of keeping on top of this and helping translate this into something that's much more human and, about kind of people and what it might feel like, because otherwise it's just a massive bureaucracy if we're not careful. So again, we hugely appreciate everything that you do to kind of make that accessible and to kind of give us that opportunity to feed in. Rachel Cooper from Forum Central, who's leading on some review that we're doing as part of Harnessing Power of Communities around how we represent and advocate on behalf of third sector organisations. Particularly wanted any thoughts on whether there's any particular barriers for the organisations that you're linked in with and any support that we can help make available. We've got some resource. We're going to be recruiting a post who particularly supports work around representing the third sector, and obviously linking in with this, really powerful bit of work around communities of interest will really inform that. So any thoughts that you've got on how to speak out, how we represent some of the least heard voices and some of the organisations, back to kind of Jez's point from what Jane from Homestart was saying about, some of those really tiny organisations who feel really quite precarious. What is it that we need to do to make sure that those voices are heard, as well as, ones that can afford kind of paid workers and people who've got sort of time and energy. So I don't know if anybody wants to think about that particularly now, or if that's perhaps a bit of a takeaway thought, just to know that we're really interested and we've got an opportunity to shape something different. So, please do take that thought back. And if you want any more information about that, then Rachel Cooper or I or any of us at Forum Central can help kind of make that link. And then there was also some information that Carl wanted to just pick up about the process for feeding into the report, Daisy.
Yeah, just quickly, we have, hopefully most of you have seen it, but just to say that we've kind of tried to streamline the process for that a bit more, given how long the report already is. But yeah, part of the process is obviously these sessions. So which you're all coming along to. So, and secondly, which again I sent an email on, but I'm trying to just provide us with a paragraph in advance of these sessions so that we can have sight of those and collate them. So if everyone can do that in advance of each session, so kind of bi-weekly, I'll try to remind you and send those through relevant for your communities, and then we can put those together and send them out. But yeah, hopefully that's clear, but just email me with any questions.
So yeah, any questions, ask Daisy. But just to reiterate, it's incredibly useful, and Leela really massively uses all of that wealth of information into the report that you produce, and you're now working with Louise from Public Health to make sure that's just one report, Leela, aren't you? So it really is listened to and heard, and yeah, thumbs up from Leela. So yeah, just really rich and important. As Tim said, this information is kind of really helping some of the work that they're doing. It is being kind of recognised locally and, to some extent nationally, I think, because, of the work that's happening with Tom Reardon and people. So I think, we are doing really important work that can hopefully have a really positive impact. So yeah, if we can make it work, then it's powerful stuff, isn't it, when we work together, because that sum of the parts is so much greater, isn't it, than if we're working individually. Any last thoughts or reflections or anything else that people had wanted to say or had hoped that we'd cover? Oh, everybody all right? Time for a cup of tea. Thank you so much. Massively brilliant to see you all. And yeah, as ever, keep in touch. Let us know. Look after yourselves. Yeah, stay safe. All those things. See you later.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.